Hello there, this is Fiona, host and main GM for What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. This is a bonus Q&A episode to tide us over to the next one-shot, and it is indeed a very special Q&A, as this week I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing comic book writer Kieron Gillen about his work DIE The RPG, a bleak fantasy tabletop role-playing game based on the comic book series of the same name, also made by Kieron Gillen and Stephanie Hans. In DIE, you play a group of authentically flawed and desperate real-world people known as personas, who are then sucked into a cursed role-playing game and take on the form of heroes, villains, and power players known as paragons. Some of you might want to get back to the real world for whatever's waiting for you there. Some of you might want to stay in a reality where you can finally get what you want out of life. The catch is that you all have to agree on whether to stay or go. I really love chatting to Kieron and discussing his passion for tabletop RPGs. I recently got to run a game of DIE for the podcast, and oh my goodness, it was so good. I'm hoping to get that out on the channel ASAP, but seriously, if you love games which go a little bit meta, get into the nitty-gritty and really explore those deeply flawed characters that you love in challenging situations, go and check it out. It's also beautifully illustrated and is published by our friends at Rowan, Rook and Picard. I'll put a link to where you can get DIE and Kieron's other work in this episode's show notes. I'll just start very generally. Who are you and what do you do?
Hi, my name's Kieron Gillen. In my day job, I write comics, and in my night job, I sort of design RPGs now, I guess. Or my very night job, I sleep. Or at least try to.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you're not like the anti-vigilante. That's your proper night job.
Well, if I did, I would not reveal it here, would I?
What? Oh no. So yes, obviously, most people will know you from the comic book world. I first found your work through Wicked Under Divine. Amazing work, which we won't talk about here, but obviously go check it out. But my big question to you is, like, how did you get into role-playing games right at the beginning? Like, were you always a player? Did you like run games? What's your story in that? What's your origin story?
I'm exactly A, old, but B, of a precise age where basically I think I came to consciousness when all this was percolating. Like, I was born in 75.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of came to consciousness, that 5, 6, 7, just as certain things were happening in culture, both in RPGs and video games, and all that stuff seemed new. The story I always tell is like, this is a video game story, but like my best mate, Dave, he didn't have a computer, but he had an older brother, therefore had inherited one.
Of course.
And he told me that the game The Hobbit, and The Hobbit is this... And on the way to the swimming bath and back, he would tell me, like, they're climbing up the walls, and and now there's the spiders, and I'm like, sounds obviously the best thing I've ever heard in my life. And then I go around Dave's house eventually one day and see it, and he never told me it was a text adventure, so I was crushingly disappointed. But the kind of the potential of all that kind of stuff tied together is what's interests me, as in the idea of even stuff like E.T. It's like a very early movie I saw, but E.T. opens with a game of D&D. It's buried it there, but like it's definitely there. So I craved it in the way that the forbidden fruit, the possibilities of other worlds, place people other than myself, all that kind of stuff. Immediately I was in. I like fighting fantasy books, and eventually got to a point when I was 10, and my mum and dad bought me Merps an RPG at Christmas, and they bought me the Middle-earth role-playing game because I was a huge Tolkien head. And of course, if people who don't know Merps is a cut-down version of Rollmaster. Rollmaster is one of the most, even of the period, a ludicrously complicated system. So you can imagine me as this 10-year-old kid, sort of, my brother's like 2 years younger, looking at these tables with amusement, and on Christmas morning sort of pushing the figures around, the rolling on stuff and checking. And over like the next few years, I somehow patched together an understanding of the game. And shortly after then, I got into Games Workshop in that point where, 40k came out at 87, isn't it? Is it 87 or 88?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And I was there from the start. In that kind of way. Obviously, I couldn't afford the figures or anything. I'm a working class Stafford kid. But like, I was aware, yet all that kind of stuff. I came into games just as it started moving into pop culture rather than real underground culture. Because you go into the 70s stuff, it's proper deep, like almost culty. And that's kind of what I quite like. It's not culty in the kind of satanic panic way. Culty is literally like, no one will have heard of it.
Yes. Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is part of the game. The game of the comic DIE is kind of about the Satanic Panic in that way. Since we've won the cultural war, we can now sort of admit that, oh yeah, it looks freaky, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the power of the dice is fundamentally what DIE is about. The idea that these dice transform people. And that's kind of metaphorically what RPGs do anyway. We take these dice, the dice as a totemic thing that transfers us to another world. And they look weird. Can you imagine like parents in the mid-80s when they see these things? Like, they know D6, they know a 6-sided dice. They don't know there's any other kind of dice. And suddenly you've got these Lovecraftian blocks of eldritch stuff on the table. Yeah. So I came in hard, and I've been bouncing in and out of RPGs most of my life. I've always been gaming in one way or the other, but my interests vary depending on what period.
So have you mostly been a player then, or have you written stuff like a homebrew stuff?
No, I wouldn't say a forever GM, because my big teenage campaign was actually run by someone else. But like normally I'm running, like I wouldn't say less so now, but even especially my group of friends, I'll be running, and I'll have said, hey, there's this random indie game, I want to run it. So it's the same as like when I was in bands and whatever. If I didn't arrange a session to play everyone to play, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah. No, I know that feeling. I think a lot of people feel that.
That urge is jamming exactly that same. That if I don't do it, and I'm much of a monster to like, if I could do a better job than the person running, I probably should do it. You know, and that's not a healthy way to think. And plus, I've loosened up quite a bit, and mainly because I play with people much better than me now. But there is a bit like, you know, I should probably do it. It's not that hard. I played very little actual D&D. I played all the way. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was my big kind of teenage campaign. I played all the way through The Enemy Within. I ran Cyberpunk. I ran GURPS. I ran Paranoia. Like, I loved. I mean, Paranoia is one of those games which is like, oh yeah, this is art, and it's not just a derivative art form. Paranoia is explicitly. I mean, I didn't quite get some of it at the time, but when you've got the list of references on the back, and it's funny. Yeah, like it's influenced by Orwell and the Marx Brothers. They've got a list of like 6 people on the thing, and it's definitely. I was young enough not to have read nearly all of them, but I knew that I should have. Later on, I played stuff like Feng Shui.
Great RPG.
That was one of my go-to games in the late 90s. And around like 98, I sort of dropped out of RPGs for like a while. And I was vaguely aware of the form. And then I sort of came back hard around 2013. Monster Hearts, I think, pretty much brought me back.
Monster Hearts. Yeah.
I played games in that period. Like, I ran a really long Warhammer Fantasy 3rd edition campaign in that, and you know, I definitely played games in there, but not in the way I play games now. Like tonight, I'm off to play. Somebody's playtesting a Brindlewood Bay hack, which is it's Cadfell, so everyone's monks. You're monks. I don't know exactly. I'm all in. Medieval monks solving mysteries. Like, no idea what it's going to be like. My character's a beekeeper, and they get boner XP if they ever give extrajudicial punishment to a sinner. And I presume they mean that in a kind of impish way rather than the Punisher way.
Yes, that's what I would assume.
Either way, I'm in. So.
I love the structure of Brindlewood Bay, and that sort of, because it's so different to any other role-playing games. And it's interesting, again, I know Paranoia was an influence for DIE, which we'll get onto in a second, but it's really interesting because elements of these things, Monster Hearts is another example, where there is not what you think is like a hack and slash, roll dice, that's the end of it. It involves a little bit more nuance. Certainly with Paranoia, I know they've got the most recent editions just come out again, but it does on that idea of a very almost like dark humor, Monty Python-esque, like everyone's sort of, it feels very British in a way, where everyone's sort of muscling their way in and blaming other people and stuff and having fun with it and really delving into those characters, those sides of you that, you know, and everyone has or can reach to an extent, but isn't necessarily one for you. And certainly with character depth as well, that's such a big part of Paranoia and has the impact on it, and then up in the clones and stuff like that. It's really interesting. And Monster Hearts is such a, I think that for me, I definitely saw the influence of that in DIE, because that's such a, the emotions in there where you're playing yourself who has these other powers and stuff, but it's just the connection that you are grounded, the ordinary and the extraordinary. So both in Monster Hearts and in DIE. So yeah, I can definitely see that. Is there a particular genre that you love playing? You talked about this monk stuff, which sounds incredible as a result, but is there any particular genre that you always would go towards, or are you more of a, I'll try anything?
This is my thing about gaming. I'm always like, anything. Like, this is like, when you were sort of coming in the 80s, it was always the weird thing when I got into being a games journalist, eventually for PC Gamer. You start to get people who are just fans of one genre. And then you've got people who are just fans of one game. Like, all they did was play Counter-Strike. And for me, no, I played flight simulators. I would never play one now, but it's like, yes, this is the best flight simulator. I'm going to play a flight simulator. Or this is Formula One Grand Prix, or very, very hardcore war games, or any literally I would play anything. Because for me, the form is the point. I was attracted to games as a possibility. And that's one reason why, like, indie RPG game design is so imaginative, and it's so quick as well. Like, in other words, the expense, the money is lower in terms of both A, you making it, but also B, to do what you want to do. So there's so much ingenuity and inspiration and attack there. That's always the thing that excites me. I can't try to think of anything I wouldn't play.
Yeah, that might be a better question, actually, yeah.
There's definitely games I'm like, I wouldn't play anything too crunchy now. Or maybe I would. If someone else was willing to run it for me, maybe.
Well, yeah, I get that feeling. No thanks.
Even when designing DIE for reasons of structure, it has to be, at its heart, a little bit traddy. As in, a lot of these, it's not player-facing. There's lots of things that are part of the design, because it has to use an objective rule system, but in quotation marks, because it's a game about, is the world you go to in DIE real? And if you make the rules mean that, no, everything you meet is just less real than you are, you've answered the question already, mechanically. But at the same time, whilst doing some of this quasi-classic simulationist in a really, really cut down way, it was also I had to be able to want to play it, or bear to play it. So in other words, like, DIE is really strict to the bone. There's, realizing I couldn't use the time-saving element of player-facing, I had to basically go, okay, it's one roll for both hit and damage, and so, and it's about reading, all that kind of stuff. I'm interested in what mechanics do, and how mechanics, and it's in DIE as well. DIE is all about rituals. There's a lot of stuff which is spicy or sizzled to the steak in that way. Is that, the rituals are passing out the dice, the rituals are, everyone close your eyes. And for me, I mean, I didn't use the word rituals, that's part of RRD, sorry, Rowan Rook and Deckard. They suddenly, rituals, the game gives you rituals, and that's suddenly, oh no, that's exactly it. It's a game about rituals. It's a game about the magic circle of gaming. We go back to game theory, but no, we'll make an actual magic circle. Inside this circle, everything is different. And that's, making the metaphorical literal is kind of one of the fun things Fantasy does. Your listeners will go, that was a really interesting series of sentences there. I'm not sure how they connect, but they were definitely...
Well, here's something to make it connect. So for those people who don't know what DIE is, whether the comic or the role-playing game, can you tell us what it is and how does it stand out to other RPGs? How would you summarize it for those people who don't know about it?
This would be a really logical thing to do. It will make people less confused. Okay, DIE. I'll start with the comic. Basically, in 1991, 6 kids sat down and played a homebrew RPG. They weren't seeing the game for 2 years. Then they returned, and they were found again, incapable of explaining where they are. Then the year it reaches 2020, or actually 2018 when we start the comic, and the people who are now broken, depressed adults get dragged back into the fantasy world where they secretly disappeared to. And now they basically see their lives, regrets and hopes and fears thrown back at them. It's basically a meta-fantasy story. It's about midlife crisis. It's also about, like, games. Why do we play games? So it's a lot about what these people allowed themselves to be in the game. And the core part of the comic, minor spoilers, is that the way to go home is you say the game is over. You get in a circle and say the game is over. But everyone has to want to do it. So the comics mainly gets to a point where some people decide they want to stay and some people don't. And the way it settles is either persuasion or murder. And that's kind of that's the drama engine. What DIE the RPG does is basically take that setup as a group of real world messed up people, go to a fantasy world. The fantasy world externalize their internal hopes, fears, and traumas. They travel through this, and they reach to a point where the person who brought them, the game's master, or the master, as the character class is called, they have to come to an agreement whether to stay or leave, either by emotional crying and therapy and holding hands, or sword point. So it's not player versus player game until literally that final scene when it can be. And that's what it's about. And the game gives you that. You need to basically do that basic structure, how to basically generate messed up people. We do it, it's question led. And you generate the social group, and basically all this kind of questions gives the GM stuff to basically throw back at the players. So in other words, like, if you say, oh yeah, I never got over my teenage crush or whatever, and you go into the world and suddenly, like, the elf princess or queen or king or whoever looks like your crush or whatever, and you run from there. That's the really basic version. But then you also get stuff like your dumb obsessions start coming back. So like, oh yeah, I was really into Funko Pops. And suddenly you're in this weird dungeon where all the goblins are like Funko Pops chasing you around. So it's all about both the high and the low and mining your obsessions. And of course, our obsessions reflected back to us is what games do. Okay, I'm going to bastardize an Alex Roberts quote. But one of the things Roberts was always interested in is, like, creativity is infinite. That's kind of what games do. So part of DIE was me basically saying, hey, I get some pretty full-on reviews. People who like my work really do like my work. And a part of DIE is basically saying, no, this is easy. This is what I did. I'm going to tell you how to do it. And you're going to be able to do your own version at home. So now there's a few, especially in the core rituals game of DIE, the questions allow you to limit it. So the questions are good questions that give you characters with powerful and messed up desires. And then having an end thing so I set climax. And it doesn't always happen. It does happen in the same place. But the idea, the game ends when they get together and make a decision. Because basically, anything can happen in the middle. As long as you have that final scene, it feels like a story.
Yes.
And the fact that the GM also is the character.
Yes.
GM character at least doesn't want to go home at the start. So you'll always have at least some manner of climax. And if the players get more messy, then there's an even different climax. And the climax and the decision to whether the game continues or not speaks to both the people who are running the game and the persona they've generated. And of course, since the game's quite bleedy, it's very easy to bring bits of yourself in. It often becomes about, so why do you play games anyway?
Yeah.
And that's the fun of it. Oh, and then there's also a load of extra stuff, like all the character classes are deconstructions of the classic RPG classes.
Yes, very, very tropey in places, which I love.
It's like all the tropes. Everyone gets sole ownership of one dice. So the D10 class is the Neo. The Neo is basically a cyberpunk character dropped into a fantasy world. They're kind of rogues. And of course, there's the classic RPG trope of, don't trust the thief character, that stuff. And it's ludicrous. In a classic D&D adventure, all the characters are clearly thieves. They literally just walk around saying, why are people scared of thieves? With Neo, the trope of them is there's a special sort of magical gold, and they need magical gold to power up their weapons and overcharge it. So basically, to do anything, they need this one resource, which disappears every day, so you can't hoard it. Yes. So they are constantly, quite regularly people play them as addicts, but isn't the only way of playing it. It's a really good metaphor for gig economy. And immediately they've got attention. And this, we come back to paranoia. They've got something which they need, which the rest of the group maybe don't need as want. How much do you support them? How much do you kick against?
Yeah.
So the tension and collaboration is really kind of built into the game in that way.
I just want to go back because there is so much. I think what you said, it bleeds through. It's so true. I like everything you say about DIE, that idea that we had these flawed personas. Like, why do we come back to games? It's so true. And when I read through the comments and then read through the RPG, I love how, firstly, that obviously the GM is a character as well. You have, like you said, the ritual idea. So almost like a LARP element at the beginning where you agree on who you're going to be. You fill out the questionnaires, beautiful questionnaires, but just to give a little prompt. And then you turn off your screen or you go out the room and then you come back in and act as if you're reuniting for the first time and having that LARP element. And that's just pure role play. That's pure conversation. And then you go on to that extra level. So going from those personas, those sort of deeply flawed personas, and then on top doing these, the paragons, these different classes. It's such a richly rewarding experience. As me, as an improviser, who definitely, a lot of my characters have an element of myself in it. And if I was running this game, I could definitely see the GM who wants to keep running and people's, scheduling conflicts. No! And so being the big bad and allowing myself to indulge in that bit, I was just like, yes. And having the idea of ritual, so making sure people are safe and knowing what they're doing, because I know a lot of this stuff, as you sort of hinted at, it can get quite dark. There's quite mature themes in it. But the second part I just wanted to drop on, getting those inspirations from what is happening in your own lives and then externalize it, because that happens so often. You put, like you said, the evil principal or the person that got away as someone in that front, and only the GM sort of knows. But I like this sort of collaborative thing where you're pulling on stuff from the players and then you're externalizing. There's a Magpie Games, Bluebeard's Bride.
Amazing game.
It's such a good game. And again, that's sort of the questions that you pull on those fears and then they create the rooms. I do think that takes a lot of switch on from the GM, but I love it in this game as well, that you've got lots of templates for stuff. There's certainly in the bit at the end where you talk about monsters, you go, here are the themes where these things could be applied to. And that's so helpful. I was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to worry about improving too many monsters that look like your mother-in-law or your father-in-law, all that sort of thing. There's just so many touchstones on it that, for me, as somebody who's played lots of different RPGs and had lots of different game groups, that I can see elements of it coming together. And it's just, I know this is like a big compliments fest, but kudos. I actually feel it, and I'm excited that such a game exists, to have that meta commentary about how we play games and how we use these games to come over our fears and stuff. And I just think it's done in such a beautiful way, from obviously the original world setting, but actually it comes through really well in the mechanics as well, with the dice and assigning it to different people. I just, obviously having the D20 as the master, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll take. That's mine. Yeah, exactly. I see you having it there on your camera.
Yes, I've got an enormous D20 as a fidget tool. Thank you, that's very kind. So my brain's got about 40 answers to various bits.
Yeah, I know, I'm the same. I've been looking forward to this for so long. I just want to, I love your game. For you then, is there a particular paragon or a class that you've developed that you're like, you're very proud of, or it stands out to you? Because you've talked about one being the Neo, obviously, the sort of the rogue one, but you've got 5 other ones in there as well.
When I was developing the game, and there was definitely a long period when I was doing the comic where I wasn't sure which was the tail and which was the dog, because I worked on the comic a bit and then I worked in the game a bit.
Yes.
And I was like, which one? And then eventually became an Ouroboros is the way I know it. It's like there were different ways of looking at die. So the truth of die is like a hologram between these two things and the different ways of thinking. And there's the whole real core bits of die which came from the game and then got put into the comic, and the other way around when I was solving different problems. So I was running die as a game well, like before the comic came out, which is, really, I had the core concept for each of the 6 classes. And then it was like, okay, we'll here's some rules. That kind of makes it work, but start playing it. And different ones had to work at different time. And there were so many times, the emotion knight's now crap. Because I've done more work. Like, this is a better class, and this is a better class. And like the master was the last one to become a full class, and then the rest was so developed by that point. It was like, oh good, well, like, I've got to really work hard on the master. And I went through several drafts to get to them. Sure. They've all got different amounts of love at different time, and where they've ended up, I think it's pretty solid. Like I don't really have a favourite.
That's fair.
I think they do their job well, which is what I think I'm most proud about. Yes. Like certain design goals, and sometimes I kind of weakened on them, not in a bad way. So no, I'm being too purist here. Like one of the things I want to do is that every character owns a dice, so it's a dice pool system. So the D6 belongs to the character called the Fool, who is the common touch sort of character. They've got this moment where they kind of realize, oh no, they're all the same as all the other ones. And at the moment, I realize, oh, I've got to make the D6 special somehow. And what the Fool can do is they're allowed to write on their D6.
Yes.
Which is the Fool is a transgressive character in that way. It's equivalent of the old naughty's World of Warcraft main Leroy Jenkins. The old kind of like, it's less of a character type archetype, it's more of a player type archetype.
See, I feel that. That's the thing. I feel that with all of them. It feels like I have been in games where there's someone who goes, fuck it, and rushes in, and you're like, no! Don't do that. Yeah, like you described it as like, rushing to danger and relying on luck just to get through, and they're lucky bastards, aren't they? They just happen to do it, and you're like, that shouldn't have worked. And so I definitely felt that, certainly the mechanics of the Fool as well. It's really interesting.
Drawing the dice feels transgressive and immediately speaks to that, which you get to do this and it's unusual. At the same time, the Fool, like, they're meant to be a slight irritant, but also like a tragedy, because they've got to be cheerful or at least optimistic for their powers to the work. So they work really well for inexperienced players, but they work very well for people who want to do the sad clown. The Empakalachi kind of, there's a word I'm not sure I'm pronouncing. But other abilities were, oh no, this is too annoying. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there's an implicit jokes in class, but this is creates tension at the table in a bad way. So you know what I mean? There's always that push and pull, which is exciting. The sort of the design thing I wanted to do was every dice are used in a different way.
Yes.
For example, the emotion dice, who is the D8, who's played a paladin but with emotions instead.
Yes.
They use the D8 basically as a counter. They only ever rolled it when they're using their top level mega ability. The whole thing about trying to use the D20 as a counter on a board or whatever. And I sort of realised that the D12, which is the Godbinder who speaks to the gods, they only really ever use theirs when, like, if they want to speak to the god, they actually use it as a physical object. Some of those stuff is still in the game, but in reality, it's like, no, people just like adding their dice to the dice pool.
Yes.
Why would I deny them this? So, you know what I mean? So there's bits like that, but also part of the game was like the core rules are quite simple. Like, it's meant to be a really simple core mechanic, because all the 6 character classes are quite bespoke. Because I was trying to mystify the character classes to the other players, so everyone else feels a bit magical. Yes. Like, my abilities don't work like that, and obviously that's in all games to some degree. But I think on some level, you sort of, especially in some games, you go, I kind of see what they're doing. Like, I understand, but unless they're doing something like alchemy or wrestling. But I mean, you mentioned earlier, actually, think about, there's so much here, and the first arc of Die, the comic, is called Fantasy Heartbreaker, which is the old technical term for sort of doing D&D clone and from the heart. And it really has a few ideas, but they're really kind of like outsider art, so they have no idea how the form has moved on. In some way, Die was me embracing that. Die is absolutely my love song to RPGs. And this is kind of like, I mean, you mentioned like the bit where you actually embody your character. That's absolutely me throwing a 5-minute Nordic LARP. It's just like in the middle of the game, and that's fine. I eventually sort of realized the whole structure of Die is like, you're at the persona level, which is what we call the real world people, at the character level, which is the inside Die, when you're transformed into a fantasy adventurer. This is like a dialogue between like the narrative and the mechanics tradition. Like, specifically, I wanted everything in the world to be embodied in the same way. Everyone has basically the same rules. And the only differences to the players are in-world differences. And the difference being they have the dice. And the dice are basically like the rings of Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
At the same time, this mechanical world of interacting. The other side is pure story game. We sort of define this as, in the fantasy world, the GM has final say, and in the real world, the players have final say. Like, you could define anything you want about your backstory. And whilst we talk about the beginning of the game, we do Persona Gen and talking about, oh yeah, my dad died when I was at school, all that kind of stuff. But that carries on forever. Like the GM could constantly ask questions.
Yes.
You get bonuses to dice if you do a flashback onto session, stuff like that. One of the things in the playtest, occasionally, the more you played the game, the more you became disconnected from the real world. And that's so much of the game structure as we developed it, was to make sure it's always about the real world.
Yes.
And it's so like, in terms of prep, it's weirdly low prep. For example, let's say you do a story like, okay, you go for the woods. Tell me about your grandmother's house, ask a player. And it did describe it, say, great, it's there in the woods. And he goes to the door and it's like, I open the door. Okay, tell me about your grandmother's front room. And you describe that. It's like the same as that, but your grandmother's now a lich and is crawling up the ceiling or whatever. So you can use them to generate the map. And then, of course, they define stuff in the real world. But then when the GM gets to tweak it in the fantasy world, however they want. I said, that's weird. Like, there would normally be a front room there, but there's not, that kind of conversation.
It's very collaborative storytelling, like at its finest. I think there's now been this big shift, certainly with sort of streaming and whatnot, where the GM is not, like you said, it is the last person and they got the rules and stuff like that. And it's their story. And I think certainly for me, with doing improv stuff, I definitely do that now. So ask players before we begin, what's the cool fact about your character? Or you're on your way to X, what do you see? And allowing to do it. And some players really relish in that. Some of them aren't sure what to do because they're like, no, you're telling the story. And I think that's what's great about DIE is having that persona generation and ongoing, as you said, like you have lots of advice about how to keep that going past session 2 and onwards. It gives them that agency and almost respect. So like people who maybe haven't run or GM'd games that they can see, as you were sort of saying earlier when you were running all the different ones, it's not that scary. You can just go and have fun and you don't have to remember all these rules and all this prep to do it when you have a trusting player base that you can talk to about it. And I think that's so important for all RPGs to do that now, rather than the traditional sort of one person, the DM with the templed fingers going, good, now roll your D20, people like that. And I don't want to say anything about that, but we've moved on and it's so nice to have this variety of storytelling and have ownership over the game itself. So yeah, I really saw that in DIE.
It has got a more structured relationship than some story, like it's not even a pure story game. It's got a more structured, as in the GM has power in certain areas, the players have more power. And of course, just that the GM has a character means that the GM is also defining stuff about their history in the real world. So they have power both as GM and as player. So all that stuff is really magical and interesting. Like, what is the relationship here? I mean, you mentioned also you being an improviser.
Yes, improver. I'll take that.
Improver. As an improver, like when you pull from a monologue, that's literally the skill what a GM is doing in DIE. Like the players are giving a monologue and you're pulling, right, okay, you did this, you did this, and then you're going to be thrown back. So it was so important for me because I wanted it to fail gracefully.
Yeah. In
the year before I started properly developing DIE, we started an RPG group. It was me, Quinton Smith of Shut Up and Sit Down. Like it was a group of my friends that we wanted to explore modern RPGs. As there was a mixture of people like me and Quinton who really just wanted to catch up, and other people who never played games before. So like, let's go. We'll hit a load of stuff, and we played like 1 shots to 4 shots maximum. And it was hard. We learned a lot. There's so much good stuff there, but some sessions just failed, and some sessions went well. The players enjoyed it, and I was distraught. Like, as in, that wasn't the aesthetic goal we were looking for. You know what I mean? So, like, it was so important for me in DIE to be more caring to the GM than that. The fact that this set ending is such a powerful part of DIE in terms of, like, you're still playing to find out what happens and all that kind of basic sort of stuff. But at the same time, you can do whatever you want. You don't need to worry about anything else. Stuff happens for 3 hours, then this happens.
Yes.
And then you'll get a capstone. It'll feel like a story anyway. That's what I mean by failing gracefully. Because one of the things players may reject making characters who are too depressed. And that's okay too, because the GM's depressed and angry.
Yeah,
and I mean,
we'll take that on, yeah.
And like, the GM, the character.
Oh, yes, sorry. That is that bleeding through thing you were talking about. Yeah.
It's always, I tell you, this one of the very key bits of the rules where it says, a lot of people say address the persona, not the player. And no, it was explicitly, hey, rat player, tell me what your character is feeling. Because if you don't do that, you suddenly get people offended. You asked about like their dead parents or whatever. And that happens. Well, actually, happened once in playtesting, and I mean, she was like, "Okay, it needs to be part."
You need to be clear on that. Yes, absolutely. It's interesting because I just this conversation has reminded me of a time. So I ran a game called In Name Only, and it's basically the whole game system is that you use your in real life name, and that's the talents you have. So for Fiona, for example, is you have fire magic, ice magic, oversized weapons, nature magic, and archery. And I ran it, and the mechanic is that the characters have these talents. No one else in the world does until the players named them. So the front end on, they're like the mayor's son, the baker, etc. And at the end, of the game. It was very interesting because everyone was really, really enjoying it. And they found the person that was going to be sacrificed to whatever demon, etc. And I said, oh, they're not waking up. They're cold. And then one of the players went, I know what to do. And went up and went, Fiona, wake up. And I burst into tears because it was just suddenly I was then in the room. I'd never had that experience before because I'd kept it separate, and I burst into tears, and everyone else was like jubilant in that sort of way. And it was such a good thing about suddenly being included. And I think this stuff game like this, where with that persona of the GM, you are seen as a player, as a antagonist, or as a working together with them. It's so different to any other game, and it's something I really would love to explore more. As you feel like, again, going back to the improv idea, it is a scene partner thing. You are working together rather than just being one person directing it all. And it just reminded me of that, what you were saying then about that sort of being that GM and just giving them that space as well as collaborating with players.
That's definitely some of the most interesting stuff about DIE, as in like the GM has a more distant relationship with their character than the players do. Yes. It's not like the GM's characters in every scene. But at the same time, especially if playing a campaign, like the campaign I did, it was pretty traumatic by the end. As in, it got to the point where the entire plot was this kind of Alice. She was this kind of like slightly gothy. The group were like literary students who had played at university and had a really bad time with each other. And then they kind of got together years later. So one of them successful, most of them aren't. And Alice is basically a revenge monster early on. And then eventually realised she's been split into 4 parts. So you've got the 4 different sections of Alice's emotions inside there. Wow. And eventually they get to the point where various bits of Alice get pushed back together again. And they get to the final scene where Alice is basically, they've talked Alice around. Like, the real baddie is defeated, who is basically her dad. There's lots of messy stuff. And you're like, oh, this is one of those cool rules about dying.
Yeah.
If you die, you come back as a fallen. So basically, this zombie creature, and you don't get a vote anymore. However, if you kill another player, you go back to life. That's a mechanic with teeth, no pun intended. And the situation was like, oh yeah, they've captured the bad guy. As in, and I gave them that very easily. And one of their players is undead at this point. This player, it's the bad guy. The dad who deserves everything. Goes back to life. They do the ritual. They go home and leave the guy there. That's justice. This player, this character, I'm not going to kill him because he's literally defenseless. It's not in a fight. This is murder. And so it goes around for everyone's very emotional. And I realised that there's a sort of way out here. And I'm sort of sitting back as my Alice. I can cheat. Now, the master, their kind of highest level ability is to just break the rules hard.
Yeah.
And it's got very, very simple. Okay, there's more mechanics as well if you listen to this. But at the top level, you put a D20 in your hand and you offer it to the rest of the group. If they find the D20, it means the forces of reality has spotted you cheating and you suffer punishment. The punishment varies depending how bad things are, how bad the cheat. If they don't pick the dice, well done, you've got away with it. So it's really a 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
And Alice basically goes, okay, I'll cheat and we can get, we'll get you out. We'll all get out. And then everyone's like, don't do it, Alice. It's literally flipping a coin. And the other person still won't kill them because it's, and Alice like, no, don't want you don't want to get, I brought you here. This is on me. It's my fault. The problem of being a better person is you have to be a better person every day of your life, which is a great line to come off the top of my head.
Amazing.
It's most annoying.
Well, you do that all the time.
Yeah, so annoying. No, the character was like, I've got to do the right thing. How annoying. And of course, I hold out the 2 dice like this to them, like this. Not in this one, because it's much easier. It was a smaller one, yeah. And everyone's obviously completely silent. So it's literally a flip of the coin, basically, whether they're going to do it. But it's a flip of the coin based around their choice. They pick it, I open the hand, and it's one with the dice. I describe it. Back in the real world, we go around the table.
Yeah.
Alice is there. I staring for nothing. She's had a heart attack and died. So in other words, Alice has been, they've all got home. Alice is left and die. The fate's unknown. Everyone's fucking heartbroken.
Yeah.
And shock. And I say, we'll all break for 5 minutes. We'll come back for the epilogue. Obviously, Alice is my character. And I was part of the conclusion. I wasn't playing as GM. I'd moved back to playing as character at that point. And it worked. It was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It would. I gave Alice a semi-happy ending when she was trapped. She was ended up being Queen of Hell and die for reasons. There's reasons why she was Queen.
There's a reason, yeah. I see it was a happy choice for her to do that. So.
Assassinated the Death God. And I put Optimo, who was literally a crayon wizard in charge of hell.
Amazing.
Which wasn't fine, but it was as good as it could give her.
Yeah. I love that with the fallen stuff, that idea that not everyone makes it back and that they have died in the real world or they've still in that other world. And you gave so many really good examples of that. The person that chooses to stay or whatever in the world, they are missed at home. And having those epilogue scenes, like, and I think what's great about it is that you've got the structure of like the rituals, opening the circle, playing it, closing the circle, taking the dice back, and the epilogues. It's such an easy structure for anyone to run, but it allows for those breaks and those pauses so that you can really feel the impact of that emotion, a very weighty emotional stuff like that. Because I can imagine like everyone going, fuck, what do we do? And now we take a break so that we can process what has happened and then come back to it. It's just more games should have structure like that just to help when we're creating beautiful stories like this, which have emotional sort of tensions, which I think makes beautiful storytelling. It just to give us that sort of structure so we know that this is our game now, this is the bit we're doing this bit in, and just to help us. Otherwise, we could spiral out and just be like, what do we do for the rest of our lives?
Obviously, that was like a big 35-part campaign. But like, I mean, the core version of DIE is like 3 or 4 sessions, I normally say. But if you want my standard GM advice to anyone, one of them is just epilogues. If you're running a one-shot, just throw in an epilogue. It gives everyone much better closure. And it is, as you say, it's a chance to decompress. It's a chance, okay, what happened then? Now I get myself to have some form of closure. And we step away, and, that's why I always like Stars and Wishes. I think anything that adds camaraderie after the game is really important.
Yeah.
But also, it's the best way to give very soft feedback to a GM who isn't getting it.
Yes. Jason Cordova, when he ran the Between, he introduced me to that idea. Like, we go around about what we enjoyed, whether it's something that we did or somebody else did as a start, and then a wish for a future session. Like, I'd love to do more scenes with so-and-so, or I would love more explanation of this. And it's just such a nice, positive and constructive thing to do. And yeah, I'm a big fan of that now after seeing it work. So I'm going to implement that into more of my games, because I think it's just, people might feel like, oh, is it more admin? But I think it's admin, important admin, say, boundaries and stuff at the beginning, Stars and Wishes at the end. It's something we should all be helping towards, just so that we can have that chance to decompress, remove ourselves from the bleed a little bit, and just go on with our days. So yeah.
It's like, actually, Stars and Wishes is about being seen. As in, you did this thing, I loved that bit. I wrote an article, I loved it in my newsletter, my tips for bad players. And like, because someone said you can't really have tips for players across all games. And I was like, actually, I disagree. I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to try. But most of the actual good ones are stuff like being supportive of the people at the table. And it's not like it's like the emotional support of like being, one of the classic bits of Powered by the Apocalypse, be a fan of the players as a GM advice. But it's like, no, be a fan of the players. Even as players, you being a better player is because if the entire table is feeling each other's successes, it's just a better table. And that's and Stars and Wishes like make sure some of that happens.
Be that scene partner who's supporting the other scene partner, and everyone raises up out of his soul. What would you say? Because obviously you're saying you're creating both the comic and the RPG at the same time, which is it sounds like a lot. I appreciate it was 5 years in development and stuff, but was there a particular part that you really enjoyed writing about DIE, or you were just like, when you did it was just like really everything came together? Was it a particular class or just an idea that you had at all?
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll just get Grant in here and he'll say, Kieron clearly must have liked writing because he wrote so much of it. Because like so much was about editing.
Yes.
And like a lot of it is just essays I enjoyed hammering out in a voice. And just the release version of DIE is so much better than any of the betas because it just drills down and gets what it's for. Yes. And like there's so much like not fluffy guidance, hard guidance, do this. Because it's like the beata's ballooned in some ways because I want to try to protect everybody. But in reality, the more you write in an RPG manual, the less anyone remembers. So like when you've got the actual, I think 7 principles of DIE GMing or whatever it is, and they're good principles.
Really good.
What I mean is they're good principles for DIE. As in, if you just read those pages, that's how you do DIE. It's like the moves in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, or the GM moves rather. So that stuff I enjoyed writing, where they really get to sort of hit it. But like the stuff I'm like, you mentioned the bestiary, which came in late, that sort of thing. And also there's a load of other people who wrote the bestiary, but I was realizing, we could do a beginner's guide to deconstruction. That's not interesting for me.
But
in DIE especially,
boring. Yeah,
I like numbers in lots of different ways, but in terms of like, because I didn't like because you can't give too interesting monsters to DIE because the point being the monsters have to be the boring monsters.
Yes,
they have to be your standard. This isn't about me being interested. This is about creating an ingredient for you to be interested. So you need to write up that stuff, but at the same time, don't want to. But Grant had the idea. It's like, okay, here's the stats. I don't know, giants. Here's some stats you can use for giants. Then we say what sort of things you could use to drive for, and then we do these things called truths. And truths are basically 300 words divided to like 40-word paragraphs of like, here are some things which are commonly acceptedly true. And it's deliberately written quite poetically, and it's full of allusions and references. And the point being, as the guide at the start of this section says, this is how you deconstruct something. You either make something more true or you invert to the truth. So it's like, Medusas as mean girls.
Yeah.
That's my go-to example because I just like that image.
I love it.
That's taking Medusa's truth and then twisting it. But like writing them were beautiful. Like generally when I was writing because I took several attempts to get to the ones I was happy with. But stuff like the giants, like you research them and you think about them. I mean, my favourite bit is the paragraph where I know that giants are unlike other creatures. They're the only fantasy creature we've actually met. We're surrounded by beings of enormous stature. They dwarf us. And slowly, day by day, they disappear. Giants remind us that we once felt protected or scared. And you know, that kind of, obviously that's I'm a parent now or whatever. But that stuff's on my mind. But yeah, that's true. You know, the weirdness that we lived around giants, and that's what I most love about that section. As it's not just me writing; it's other people.
Yeah.
Here's something to think about. There's little short paragraphs to get you thinking, and that's you know, like prompts. That's the stuff I like. As in, because so much of my favorite RPG writing is and go. It's not like, and I love the long rambling paranoia form as well. But the fundamental idea is, here's an idea I'm going to put in your head, and it's going to explode and blossom.
For me, when I'm putting together like RPGs, it's usually just a prompt, and I go, it runs away with it, and that's what I really loved certainly about the Bestiary is that's the thing. It feels little touchstones rather than long paragraphs. Yeah, and I totally see that paranoia as well. It's like you definitely have to go, okay, and then go into it, even though like you can get the feel quite interesting. Yeah, anyway, one thing I just cause on that, because one of my favorite things about it is obviously we talked about it, this idea that it is a group coming back to something, and usually we think of it as teenagers who used to play, and then now they're coming back as older. I love how you've given other examples of it in DIE as well, like the people at a convention. I love that, and like playing a video game as well. Because I think sometimes it's so nice to switch that dynamic as well, so that you weren't maybe friends, but you're co-workers, you're something else, and just changing similar dynamics, but putting it in elsewhere. And I'm a big fan of that as well. So if for whatever reason the reuniting of friends isn't for you, there is other examples of it in the DIE core book as well, just to taste it. I love the convention one. I definitely I know it's meant to be played at a convention as well, so I'm like, yeah, that's going to happen at some point for me. I want to run that because I think it's such an interesting setup from that point of view.
I'm going to Gen Con this year, and I'm thinking I'm going to do a different version of that similar kind of setup. Like that, the one that's written is actually about a comic book team, so it's very, very, very meta. Yeah. But I want to do a more games culture orientated version of that. So like similar, but because actually the first large playtest I ran of DIE was at Nine Worlds, and it was an early version of this scenario, and it's basically. It was a pickup game at the con, so there was relationships there, but it was mainly the GM was just a parasite trying to mess with people, like basically steal people's lives and get what they wanted. So it's that. I'm going to use it as Gen Con. I'm going to make it much. I'll call it Open Gaming License to Kill. And we're going to see how we go from there.
Yes. Oh, topical reference. I love it.
Yes. This is actually a good example. So much about like DIE is meant to be improvised, but we provide the structure. So the con one, of course, is you take the con map you're at, and you use the con map as your central dungeon map. And you appear in whatever room you're playing and go, okay, and you've chosen somewhere they've got to get to, and you use, okay, what would the trader hall be? You know, and you can sort of build, and it's like all you need is a prompt. And this returns to that kind of thing. I'm about to try to do a hex crawl. Like, you know what I mean? There's so much about DIE for me is like, a few questions to generate the group, way to generate the world, often including those questions, endgame. And that's how you write a DIE scenario. Like, and obviously, as you say, we've got quite a few in the book, and we've got different social groups, but like, I'm pretty sure the first project we'll do, like an add-on book for DIE, will be, here's some more scenarios. Because most scenarios in any game, you're picking them for parts. Like, you can run them straight, but you always think, oh, I'll nab that bit. Yeah. With DIE especially, I think, the fact you have each one of the social group questions can be lifted off, and you could do something else, you know what I mean?
And it goes back to what you were saying before about using the dice as physical stuff as well as sort of rolling them. I'm a big fan of props. So instantly I'm like, get the map out. I'm a big fan of that because, again, that speaks to the improviser in me as well. My flip question to like, what was your favorite thing, which is probably an unfair question, I'll admit, is like, was there anything particularly challenging? I assume you just kept writing and then having the editing process, but was there anything particularly challenging about DIE that you were like, it didn't take you long to think about, but just stuff like you were like, and then when you got over that obstacle, you were satisfied with it, if you see what I mean?
And so definitely discovering there's this key on this keyboard called delete. Grant told me it. Like, apparently that you can press it and then your manuscript gets shorter. I was very confused by this. What was hard?
I guess you're talking your stride, really, because obviously I know it's 5 years of a lot of hard work, but if there was anything, because sometimes...
The final crunch was hard. Like, obviously, I had to basically rewrite the whole manuscript, do a polish on the whole manuscript in a week when I was away, abstractly meant to be on holiday. Wasn't on holiday.
No.
Like, when I was with my friends and they spent the entire time sitting in front of me in a hot tub, whilst I was wrestling with this bit creature.
Oh, no.
The full manuscript was about 300k, and the thing is, mostly it was extraneous. You know, I was writing 300,000 words to discover the right 5,000 words. Some of the fluffier stuff was tricky. Knowing when to stop, that was probably because I definitely got to a point where I realized, oh no, this entire thing I'm developing now isn't an RPG. This is an extra RPG.
Yeah.
Like, because it's by definition, you're making worlds, it's never over.
Mm.
Yeah, there was a lot that was difficult, but nothing specifically. It was all nightmarishly hard. I mean, I used fun, but I mean, I used to be a games journalist, as I said before. But one of the things that when my friends who've gone from games journalism to games, they occasionally say something like, "Oh, I never realized it'd be this hard," and I'm like, "You've interviewed game developers. You've seen their broken eyes and tired faces. Like, did you think they were lying?"
Yeah.
I always knew it was going to be nightmarishly hard. You know, it's clearly nightmarishly hard.
You already prepped for it. So.
Yeah, I just believe people. I'm a simple man.
I think you have talked about it a little bit, but it'd be interesting for anyone who's like obviously listened to this or has picked up DIE and goes, I want to run it. Was there a big tip that you'd give people for running a game of DIE for the first time?
There, you've got this. The important thing about reading DIE is we've done it. It's a proper RPG manual, and this is actually I was going to say this is the hardest thing. Its reality is we reworked the structure of the book like maybe 3 times, and it was a bit hard to say. Oh, I'd rewritten the whole to be like something else. Then they realised it actually has to be the other way again, and like that was like a lot of work. That kind of, but that the point of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with DIE in the present manual state is we've arranged it like a manual. Like, so you go in, intro, basic rules, the character classes, then you go into sort of more scenario and GM-y stuff. In another version of DIE, you kind of like just start with chapter 7, which is rituals. That is by far the most important chapter in the book. As in, like, people quite often when reading the book manual, they might get lost in the character class stuff. Don't. My recommendation for your prep should be maybe read the introduction.
Yeah.
Get the character sheets, flick through them. No need to read them. It's just you've got the basic rules on the character sheets too. That's all you need to know. So get a high level view of roughly what the characters are like. Then just read rituals. Like if they haven't read, because it's like you don't understand what the game is until you've read that chapter.
Agreed.
And that's it. And like if I was going to give more specific tips, I saw that it really is those kind of the GM guideline chapters. As I've got those 7
really
rules.
Good.
Is persona generation never ends. Ground the fantastical. Weird the normal. Players have final say everything established about their personas. GM has final say everything established in the fantasy world. If the player rolls, something happens. Take notes. Like persona generation never ends is the first one for that reason I mentioned. Because that, whilst Weird the fantastical and Ground the normal, they kind of come from persona gen. But the fact that the idea of always be asking questions. So in other words, like if you ever stuck for inspiration as a GM, just ask a player. As an orc here, I've got no idea what's weird about the orc. Say, ask a question. Who do you most hate in the world to a player? Lob it straight at the orc. It's never too late to mine someone for something to make the world interesting. We mentioned Cordova for the 5th time in the session this time. I think.
Me too.
Yeah. But his technique, paint the room, which is the idea that you ask a player a question like, for example, how did you realize that this room there's a trap in this room? And it's not just establishing a fact in the world, it's also establishing something about the character. How does your character spot, which is really great storytelling. That's not quite how DIE works. DIE works by asking people questions and they don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's me trying to re-enchant the magic of like the classic RPG. So there's some ways there is the all-powerful gem and the steepled fingers we talked about. Like there is some of that in DIE, but it's not for the same purpose.
No, completely different. Yeah.
You're explicitly, I'm listening to you. So in other words, by asking this question, this is going to have an effect on the world.
Yes,
you don't know for sure. And that's, for me, that the magic of creation is like, whilst the full-on collaborative method is incredibly powerful and works in most of the, what I love in almost all the games, with DIE, the insurity is the key. Because in the same way in the real world, we don't really know what's happening. Like it's slightly out of control. And that's one reason why dice and random devices are quite compelling as a system. Because the fact it suddenly becomes out of control makes it real. And that's kind of what I was trying to evoke with DIE and the way Persona Gen. So much about DIE is that. Ask questions about real world, integrate.
And I loved your previous one about talking about epilogues as well. I think everyone needs epilogues for that closure. I think that's such a that's such an interesting one. That's something I will definitely put forward in my future campaigns. But Kieron, we've talked for ages. And honestly, I've gone red because I'm so excited. And I honestly, thank you so much for taking the time. My final question to you is, where can we find out more about your work? Where can we find DIE when it's out? And do you have anything else that's upcoming? I'm being appreciative that you've worked so hard on this that you're like, I need a break from stuff. So over to you. Where can we find your stuff?
I've got a website, KieronGillen.com, and that links to most things. I do a newsletter like any week I have a comic coming out, I'll probably do it. And some weeks when I don't, I'll plug anything that's happening in the various forms. I'll write essays. Like I've got a review of Trophy Gold I've got to finally polish up. So that's a really good way. If you like my nonsense, that's the best place to get my nonsense. DIE will be coming out. It's at the printers at the moment. So when we'll actually ship, I think it'll be in shops by April. So it'll be in people's hands, I think, by March, at least in Europe. Okay, don't quote me on this.
Don't worry. When this goes out, will be at a certain time as well. But I'll try and, if I can schedule it so it does come out around this time, then I'll definitely do that. So don't worry about that.
But it'll hopefully be with people soon. It's available to pre-order RRD. Otherwise, comic shops and game shops can order it as well. I've only got one comic coming out at the moment. I'm writing a major crossover for the X-Men at the moment called Sins of Sinister. But I do a book called Immortal X-Men, which is fun. And games-wise, like I'm ambling around and writing some more DIE scenarios. I've got an idea for another DIE book, which involves me actually. The whole region rules in DIE in the manual, which is kind of vestigial. That's deliberately one of the things I was like, I could do a lot more on this, or just stop and go outside. Possibly picking that up. I said, like, there's a couple of DIE scenarios I want to write. There's a hex crawl one about. So the concept is a group of people who haven't got over their partners, and they're drinking in the bar all the time in different ways. So everyone's got their own kind of like messed up relationship with ex, and they get dragged into this world by the one person who in the group is sick of it, who of course secretly has even worse history. And of course it's called X Crawl.
Amazing.
So it's part pun, part genuinely emotional trauma. We'll see how it goes. And I'm thinking on some small games. I've got an itch.io page, which I've done like my really kind of small like sketch games almost. Come Dice with me, my Come Dine with Me RPG. Yes. That's fun. But I've got a couple of things. I'm working on In the Night Garden inspired RPG. It's In the Night Garden
so
meets
different to DIE.
Oh no, it's not. In the Night Garden meets Cosmic Horror Apocalypse. So it's basically about the end of the world coming to this children's thing, and it's really ritualized. Like it starts with a map building game, and by the end of the game, I want people to burn the map as the world starts falling apart. So like I'm playing around with this, like you know what I mean. I write stuff, and I've got a game. I've almost got the point where I might release it to people to play test. About how do aliens do it, and it's basically a Brindlewood Bay hack where you play naive, sincere, but deeply ignorant aliens who trying to work in a very repressed society, trying to work out how sex works in that way. So basically, you generate random body parts and like tentacles and psychic fields, and then you try to work out how sex may work, and then you roll dice to see how true it is, and you carry on until they're all. So it's essentially about imagining queerness and how identity and bodies of our own, but it's also quite sincere. You know what I mean? So these are all really small little sketch games, but I don't feel I'll do anything as big as DIE for a long time yet.
And that's fair.
I wrote an Apocalypse Key scenario, which is coming out as part of the Kickstarter goals, which is called The Company of Gentry. It's about evil fae fracking the UK for magic.
Oh yeah, no, Apocalypse Keys looks incredible. I'm really excited to get my PDF of that. So, of course, exciting for that as well. Wow, I mean, lots there for people to digest. But honestly, I thank you so much, Kieron. I think if people haven't read DIE the Comic or the RPG, I highly recommend it, just because it for me touched on so many things that I really enjoyed about role playing, and I think it revealed a lot of stuff. So I think it is definitely an asset to gaming. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight.
I'm hoping to do more of these special Q&A bonus episodes in future, including Q&As on the one-shots we run here at What Am I Rolling? If you have a question or think of an RPG designer you'd like to see interviewed on this podcast, let us know. Our email address is whatamirollingpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. Great. See you next time.